Some health experts have worried that social distancing might cause more Americans to experience being lonely.
New survey, national survey from Florida State University College of Medicine finds the measures did not lead to an uptick in loneliness, at least in the first months of the pandemic.
So this was kind of interesting because they had started this survey about loneliness back in January. So they had all this pre-pandemic data that wasn't influenced by the pandemic. They didn't then go back and say, how were you feeling in January? They knew how people were feeling in January. So they thought, wow, this is an incredible opportunity. Let's then revisit these people in March and April.
Yeah. Pretty cool, and somewhat counterintuitive, Heather. I mean, this is not what I expected.
And I'm happy that it's not what we expected because it found that there really wasn't that much of a difference in when you're asked how lonely are you. There wasn't a huge change in March and April. We have to remember, though, March and April, that was still the beginning. You have to sort of wonder what happens down the line. But they came up with
But that was the most isolating months, don't you think? Like the first time when people weren't leaving their houses at all, really.
It was so jarring back then, too. But I think part of the reason people then did adapt to it is because it was so jarring. So I think at the time, if you really think back to when that was, it was when people were really just in their homes. You had a lot of neighbors helping neighbors that maybe wouldn't have done that in the past. You had a lot of people, I remember this, people reaching out to maybe college friends or longtime friends that they hadn't talked to in a long time, and were doing Zoom happy hours or FaceTimes.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. I guess it does go, in part of this, you could look and say, look, if you were lonely before, you probably are still lonely. So the pandemic, it's not that problems were solved, but it's that people who did not kind of track themselves as being lonely, they didn't feel abandoned. So, I mean, we have seen, and we have heard this before, that younger people reported being more lonely than older people, which again I think is one of those, it's a little bit of a misconception, right, driven by perhaps outdated ideas about aging, where you think the young people are just living it up, have tons of friends, but in fact our digital age, I think, has made younger people who live a lot of their life online, they were lonely before. They
did, though, point out, though, in the survey that they didn't really look closely at people who did not have internet, more in rural areas. They also didn't look in nursing homes. So they may have missed some of that loneliness there, too. One of the things I thought, though, was really interesting was one of the reasons they felt like people weren't more lonely is because of FOMO. The fear of missing out is that nobody was going out and going to parties and restaurants and out on the lake.
It's true.
And if nobody else was doing it, then I didn't have to feel bad that I wasn't doing it.
That's a good point. Like we all were in the exact same situation.